The death of George Floyd in police custody has many people calling for a new approach to public safety and emergency response. The College Dems of Massachusetts think that elected officials should stop taking campaign contributions from police unions. State Representative Lindsay Sabadosa is among those from this region who've signed the pledge, and Carrie Saldo asked her why.
I think that this week in particular, there has been a lot of conversation about reform, criminal justice reform, which has always been something that I've been very interested in, and police reform. And it is incredibly difficult to really be an advocate, to really try to push the envelope on bold change if you are taking money from people who are potentially going to advocate against that. So for me, it was a really easy thing to sign on to because it was something that I was going to do anyway. I'm happy to take donations from my constituents, regular people, but I don't really want to take money from organizations that are then going to expect me to endorse policies that I don't believe in. If there are individual officers out there who are looking to figure out how we reform the institution of policing, that's different. But taking money from large organizations that have been very public, unfortunately, about unwillingness to change seems like a poor choice to me.
The pledge says, in part, quote, by accepting campaign contributions from police unions, elected officials are bound to represent the police, not the people, thus enabling the violence and brutality that we have seen over the past weeks. But do you think that that statement unfairly paints a broad brush across all police officers when clearly not all police officers are using brutal tactics?
I think that statement refers to policing in general, and I don't think that there is any argument to be made at this point, particularly after the protest this week, that many police across the country have resorted to very brutal tactics. We have seen first the murder of George Floyd. We have seen the murder of Breonna Taylor. We have seen protesters had tear gas, dogs, vehicles run into them. I don't know that there is an argument to be made that there is not a problem with the institution of policing in this country.
When you talk about the idea of reform, there's been a lot of discussion about that, obviously, in recent weeks. And one of the ideas that keeps coming up is this idea of defunding the police. Is that something that you would be in favor of? And if so, what does that look like for you?
Well, I think that we need to be careful about what we take that to mean. So I don't think that defunding the police means pulling all funds away. I think that defunding the police right now means defunding the militarization of the police, taking away funds from police officers when those funds are being used to address social issues. So why are police officers the ones that we are sending out when someone is in crisis, when there's a mental health break, when there's an overdose, when there are family situations, when there's a child? Police have responded to cases where there are autistic children who are in crisis. That is not the responsibility of a police officer. Those are social issues, and we should be investing in programs and in prevention to stop those issues. We should not be sending the money to the police officers instead. And I think that that's where the words defunding come from. I don't think that there's anyone who's going to argue, well, there may be some, but I think that there will be many fewer who argue that there's absolutely no need for no police ever. But the number of cases that the police really truly need to respond to, where we really need an armed person showing up at someone's house, are very small. What we really need are investments in social determinants of health and in housing, in education, in mental health, in substance mistreatment disorders. That's where the money needs to be going. And if we can then prevent the greatest number of cases from happening, and if there is a crisis rather, have a crisis response team that shows up without guns, that shows up without pepper spray, for example, I think that we're going to see that over the long run, that's a better investment in our society. And that's where this term defunding comes from. We could even call it reallocating, if you'd like.
To your point about police responding to whether it's mental health crisis issues or truancy issues, we have community police officers who are stationed in many schools in our region and across the country. Who do you think needs to come to the table to take a look at what it is that our law enforcement officers are now responsible for, and whether or not that is an appropriate use of their skills and their skill sets?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to determine what what is a police officer and what is a police officer supposed to do. So who comes together? We need educators, we need our elected officials, our municipal leaders, we need our social workers, we need people who have expertise in behavioral health and substance misuse, who have expertise in dealing with different segments of the population. So the way that one might approach a veteran who has PTSD is going to be very, very different than the way you would approach a small child who is in crisis, perhaps because they have some sort of learning disability. It's not always the same response. People are not one size fits all. The response cannot be one size fits all. There are cities and towns that have put together crisis teams that work really well to try to address these issues. So we could use those as models, but I do think that we need to figure out how we separate that from traditional policing, because and I know this week we've spent a lot of time talking about the history of policing, but police were put in place, the institution of policing was put in place to protect property. Now, do we live in a world where that is our priority, protecting property, or do we live in a world where our priority is protecting people? The response to the protesters has been that the mission of the police is to protect property. We see them standing in front of Targets and Macy's, and what we don't hear about is the number of people who are maced because they're out on the streets asking not to be killed anymore.
But closer to home, you've been out on the street with some protesters in our region. What response have you observed from between police and those protesters, where largely the protests in our region have been very peaceful, as have the majority of protests across the country, although there has been some attention given to the more violent incidents that you've called attention to? I want to be clear about the fact that in this region, the majority of these protests have been peaceful. So what has that police protest interaction been like when you've been there?
So I want to take that a step further and say in the majority of the country, the protests have really been peaceful, even in places where the protesters have been met with brutality. I have been to, I believe, 5 protests now within the state of Massachusetts, some large, some small. I've noticed primarily that we're seeing a lot of families show up, which I find very heartening to see young children out on the streets. I've always felt that way. The police response has been really different from community to community. In Northampton this weekend, there was a very heavy police response, which is unusual. And I've organized a lot of protest marches in Northampton with thousands and thousands of people, and that is not a normal reaction. I went to a very small protest in Hatfield, which was beautiful. The police officers marched with us, which I thought was a very nice gesture. No one asked them to, they just joined the crowd and marched along. And then, last week in Boston, I was at the State House and we were told we need to end session now and leave because there's a protest and they're going to start closing down streets. And leaving the State House and watching helicopters come in and really the mobilization of the police, I thought was pretty terrifying. And it made me think that, they must, envision a really violent protest happening. Instead, it was an incredibly peaceful, calm protest. And we need to think, when protesters come out, they react as well. You're talking about a disorganized group of people who just decide to leave their house that day. They haven't been trained. They haven't been told, at 9:52, this is happening. This is a group of people who spontaneously show up. And when they show up and they find, an armored vehicle in front of them and dogs and lines of police officers, it does lead to this belief that, the police are either over responding or they're expecting them to do something dangerous, which is often not the case. And it feels like if the protesters are out there asking the police to tone it down, to respond appropriately, to de-escalate, and the response is instead an increased mobilization, there is a complete lack of communication between the two groups.
I want to ask you about one more thing just quickly. We're short on time, but Somerville recently, the city declared that systemic racism is not only a public safety, but a public health emergency. And he called, the mayor there called on local and state officials to do something about this. Will you create legislation that supports that?
Absolutely. I think we're all looking to the Massachusetts Black and Latino Caucus, which came out with its 10-point plan. Chair Gonzalez, who chairs that caucus, is He's from Springfield, and we're all looking to him and to the other members so that we can follow their lead. And I do think it's really important right now that we are looking to people of color and following their lead. In addition to that, all of us are thinking about legislation. I know that Rep. Connolly from Cambridge is talking about legislation that would ban the use of tear gas. It's banned in warfare, yet we are using it on protesters. I'm also looking at legislation around the use of social workers and crisis response teams. So I think you'll see a lot filed, and a lot of us have really, really taken to heart this message. This is a public health emergency. Much like COVID, this is a public health emergency, and we need to address it with the same force and with the same dedication.